So, Citizen Vigilante is the latest film from Uwe Boll, and it is easily his worst movie. And I know that, Uwe Boll has made a lot of terrible movies, but they've always been laughably bad. That they'd have they would look cheap, they had terrible acting, and they were poorly written films. But Citizen Vigilante is a whole other level of bad. To watch Citizen Vigilante is to stare into the abyss of the right-wing losers, the disgrace of Armie Hammer, the horrendous filmmaking of Uwe Boll, and the vile politics of racist conservatives have all festered to form this rotten movie as ill-thought as it is horrifically offensive. The middle-aged white guy banned from his favorite bar and distanced by his family for his grotesque politics. For that guy, this is likely the revenge movie they'll favor most, where the bigoted man who targets people of color is not the villain or even the anti-hero in a movie like this. He is the hero. A hero that could only exist in the most farcical of conservative revenge fantasies. The only way to root for the vigilante killings committed by the protagonist is to fully buy into his limited worldview and unlikable personality. Armie Hammer plays Michael Sanders, an ex-soldier who inherits his father's real estate business, and he does a poor job of running it personally. He bitterly steps into his offices to deny housing to migrants and tell his staff that they're too old, right to their faces. If the film began here, there'd be something to build on, with Sanders learning to run his business better and to understand the plight of immigrants in his nameless European country, of which he is not a citizen, despite the movie's title and the character's politics. But this is not a movie about character growth. I mean, this is a movie where a hideous person can declare, I'm not racist, I'm just being honest, and every white person around him will just nod in agreement through the magic of conservative-brained writing. Angered by Europe having too many migrants, committing crimes, and never being prosecuted the way he'd like, Sanders takes on the role of a vigilante who gets revenge on those raped and or murdered by migrants. His actions are never condemned online because the movie only shows us the social media feed of those praising his violent actions. It's no surprise that the only time we see somebody looking at this social media is Sanders himself, just, so satisfied with his efforts. I'm surprised that he didn't just, start masturbating in between hitting the like button. Because trust me, that's not too absurd for a character like this. Hammer's performance in this movie is just awful, but I mean, he's working with a terrible script. This is a character who gets mad at young punks who don't pay their fair share on the bus and proceeds to give them a lecture on shoplifting that is so dumb, I'm surprised nobody laughed at him for making this corny monologue. This is a man who has dull sex with a prostitute and then interrupts the act to comment on the mold on her walls because he can't just, he can't help himself. He's a scummy landlord. The only criticism Sanders receives comes from the Interpol agent Henry, a man committed to his job even though nobody seems to appreciate his efforts to bring in this vigilante, because everybody despises him in this movie. When Henry says rather calmly that he's only trying to preserve some sense of justice so the world doesn't descend into chaos, there's a waitress who retorts, "Who cares?" A better film might have highlighted the nihilism that Henry encounters with a public that is willing to support such a criminal and his actions that get people killed, but not this movie. You're not meant to sympathize with Henry's plight. He's the antagonist. You're supposed to boo him. You're supposed to be on the side of nihilism in this trashy picture. And just, wow, is it garbage. I mean, Uwe Boll has never been a good director, but he's at his worst in this movie. For an action movie under 90 minutes, this movie is a tedious slog. The scene where Interpol agents descend on Sanders' estate is one of the most boring because it's just so drawn out. Many minutes are wasted showing how Interpol transports navigate through traffic. We get lots of shots. We get overhead shots. We get, driver's point of view shots. We get shots from across the street. We get get more overhead shots. And after those many camera angles of obeying traffic laws, we get longer scenes of agents filing out of the transports, readying their weapons, ascending the estate stairs, setting explosives to open doors, and moving through the mostly empty estate until they find Sanders. And even when Sanders meets them with a barrage of automatic weapons and explosives, these scenes of brutality are also played out way too long in scenes of slow motion and cheap special effects, and there's hardly an ounce of tension to this. In addition to being poorly paced, the film is also a mess of ill-fitting edits within a non-linear narrative. This film jumps all over the place, and there's very little to define each moment in the timeline. Not that it matters, though. I mean, the story shows no character growth aside from Henry, who is convinced that Sanders is right over the course of a phone call at the end of the movie. I'm assuming Boll thought the movie would be more intriguing if all the many scenes were just kind of like shuffled up, to add a little life into this lifeless drivel, but it only makes the movie feel more like a skipping record than a compelling tapestry. There's no excitement when the puzzle being assembled here is that Sanders kills some migrant rapists, kills some Interpol agents, and then never answers for his crimes. Citizen Vigilante is a boring, bile-inducing dose of right-wing propaganda built by and for failures. There is nothing to like about this movie, with its poorly edited assembly and out-of-touch script that unironically has the hero blaming the world's ills on a blindsided woke left, like he unironically says this. The most laughable part of this deeply hateful movie comes at the very end with a dedication to, quote, the thousands of rape and murder victims in Europe who were betrayed by our legal system. And be real here. Uwe Boll doesn't care about these issues and just wants to say the quiet part real loud, considering how little he engages with the European legal system, immigrant issues, and the socio-economic factors beyond cartoonish reductions. This is not a movie for people deeply concerned about systemic problems. This is for the white guy tired of being criticized and mocked for spouting right-wing falsehoods that make him sound like the villain. In this movie, that guy is the hero, but it's a fantasy that won't last, as this conservative revenge fantasy quickly falls into the pit of other right-wing movies that were once labeled as sticking it to woke Hollywood and were never heard from again. May Citizen Vigilante be buried quickly, lest it fester into manifestos of the many white guys who want an excuse to be more racist and violent. So yeah, I really, really, really hate the shit out of Citizen Vigilante. This is by far Uwe Boll's worst movie. And I know that a very low bar, but somehow Uwe Boll found a way to go even lower with this deeply hateful piece of shit.